What if the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley himself, whispered a secret so personal, so unexpected, that it didn't just rattle those closest to him? It shifted the way Priscilla Presley saw him forever. This isn't your typical love story. It's a tangled web of loyalty, unspoken heartbreak, and one woman unknowingly walking into the emotional crossfire of two lifetimes. What she discovered peeled back the polished image of Elvis and exposed something raw, something real. Stay with us, because once you hear what Priscilla uncovered, you'll never look at Elvis the same way again. Linda Thompson had always dreamed big. After all, she had just been crowned Miss Tennessee Universe. But even with all the glitter and spotlight that came with her title, she never could have imagined that her path would soon cross with one of the most iconic figures in American history. Her life up until that point had been defined by pageants, ambition, and Southern charm. Then came an unexpected invitation, one that would turn her world upside down. An exclusive evening hosted by none other than Elvis Presley himself. Not a concert, not a dinner, a private movie screening, just a few close friends, and the king of rock and roll. The air inside the dimly lit screening room at Graceland buzzed with quiet luxury and mystery. Plush seats, flickering shadows, and soft laughter filled the space. But Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding. From the moment Elvis looked her way, the room might as well have vanished. There was an energy between them, playful, magnetic, undeniable. What started as casual conversation over a film reel blossomed into something far more electric. By the end of the night, the two weren't just sharing glances. They were sharing the kind of spark most people only read about in books. And yet, even in that whirlwind of glamour and charm, there was an undertow of something deeper. Something that would soon pull Linda into a story far more complicated than she could have anticipated. Because stepping into Elvis's life wasn't just about candlelit moments and grand romantic gestures. No, Linda was walking into a world still echoing with the weight of a very public past. A world shaped by headlines, heartbreak, and emotional ties that hadn't been neatly severed. Behind the laughter and luxury were shadows of unresolved pain, relationships that hadn't quite ended, and emotional debts still unpaid. She wasn't just dating Elvis Presley. She was stepping into a storm of love, memory, and lingering loyalty. And although she didn't know it yet, a single request made in the quiet moments would place her at the center of a truth so delicate it could shake everything. After his headline-making divorce from Priscilla Presley, Elvis appeared every bit the dazzling showman the world adored. Charming, generous, larger than life. But behind those rhinestone-studded jumpsuits and iconic stage smiles was a man navigating the emotional wreckage of a love story that had ended far too publicly. He filled his days with music, opulence, and the comfort of familiar faces. But privately, Elvis was adrift. The very fame that had once brought him everything was now a lonely echo chamber, amplifying the parts of himself he couldn't quite mend. He craved something steady, something real, and in walked Linda Thompson, unknowingly offering him exactly that. Linda quickly became more than a girlfriend. She was a constant in his ever-unstable world. She traveled with him, listened to his midnight musings, and soothed the aching places he rarely let others see. Her presence grounded him, gave him peace in the chaos, and reminded him of who he was beyond the glittering facade. But she also knew, deep down, that she was joining a story already in progress. She wasn't the first to hold his heart, and she wouldn't be the last to feel the complexities within it. Being with Elvis meant embracing both the highs of adoration and the quiet shadows of a man still haunted by love that never quite let go. Because even as Elvis showered Linda with affection, lavish gifts, spontaneous adventures, whispered songs meant just for her, there were moments when the past crept in, uninvited but never unwelcome. A look in his eye when he mentioned Priscilla, a pause in conversation when certain memories surfaced, a softness in his voice when Lisa Marie's name came up. These weren't just passing thoughts. They were quiet threads still woven into the fabric of his life. Linda felt it. Every glance, every silence, every carefully chosen word. She was part of his present, yes, but always sharing space with a ghost from his past, and that ghost was about to make her presence known in a way Linda never saw coming. One quiet evening, just before a gathering that would bring past and present face to face, Elvis turned to Linda with a request that caught her completely off guard. His voice, usually so full of confidence and command, carried a softness, almost an ache. "Honey," he said gently, "don't wear all the jewelry I gave you tonight." At first, Linda was confused. The shimmering pieces had become tokens of their time together, glittering symbols of affection and devotion. But as he continued, the reason unraveled itself slowly, and it landed heavier than she expected. "I never gave Priscilla that much," he admitted. "I don't want her to feel bad." It wasn't a demand. It was a vulnerable confession. For Linda, the moment was jarring, not because of the request itself, but because of everything it revealed. She had stepped into this relationship prepared for the weight of Elvis's fame, but not for the emotional debts still lingering in his heart. He wasn't thinking like a rock icon. He was thinking like a man still holding on to a past he couldn't fully leave behind. His concern wasn't about appearances. It was about protecting someone else's feelings, even if that someone no longer wore his ring. The request peeled back yet another layer of Elvis's complicated inner world, where affection and guilt walked hand in hand, and where the lines between past love and present loyalty blurred in the most unexpected ways. And so, Linda obliged. She removed each necklace and ring one by one, her fingers trembling not from anger, but from the realization of what this truly meant. This wasn't about diamonds. This was about empathy, about unfinished chapters, about a man whose heart was big enough to love deeply, but perhaps too full of ghosts to ever truly move on. The jewelry remained in its velvet box that night, but the emotional weight of that moment lingered far longer. Linda wasn't just honoring a simple favor. She was stepping into the emotional crosswinds of two lives still quietly intertwined. The day Linda finally met Priscilla Presley was one she had quietly anticipated and quietly dreaded. The air was thick with unspoken possibilities. Would there be tension, icy stares, polite but distant formalities? After all, how often does the new woman meet the one who came before, especially when the man in question is Elvis Presley? But what unfolded was not what Linda expected. As the two women stood face to face, there was no visible animosity, no sharp words or veiled looks. Instead, Priscilla extended a hand, and with a calm, almost disarming poise, offered a simple but powerful gesture. "Grace." "Thank you," Priscilla said, her voice composed and sincere, "for being kind to Lisa Marie." That single sentence landed with surprising weight. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't obligatory. It was real. And in that moment, Linda felt the immense strength it must have taken for Priscilla to say it. They were two women on opposite ends of the same story, one helping to write the next chapter, the other still carrying the emotional ink from the last. Priscilla's words weren't just a thank you. They were a silent acknowledgement that the well-being of her daughter mattered more than old wounds. And Linda received that sentiment with humility and quiet respect, knowing full well what it must have cost to speak it. But behind the composed expressions and poised small talk, there was something deeper simmering just beneath the surface. Neither woman said everything she was thinking. They didn't have to. The room was already filled with echoes of what had been and what would never quite be again. It was the kind of moment where every smile carried a shadow, where every kind word came wrapped in layers of emotion. Grief, understanding, maybe even a touch of envy. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a truce, a fragile, silent agreement to navigate the complex terrain between them with dignity. Yet even in that silence, the weight of Elvis's past choices and present realities hung like perfume in the air, subtle, inescapable, and impossible to forget. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind filled with sunlight streaming through the windows and the gentle hum of everyday life at Graceland. Linda was sharing a playful moment with young Lisa Marie, brushing her hair or maybe helping her pick out a dress. Something simple, something sweet. Out of nowhere, with the kind of honesty only a child can deliver, Lisa looked up and said, "My mommy doesn't like you." The words landed like a sudden crack in a perfectly painted wall. There was no malice in her voice, no anger, just an innocent observation stated with the clarity of a child who didn't know the weight of what she was carrying. Linda paused, heart tightening. She smiled softly, refusing to let the moment turn cold, brushing it off with the grace she'd learned to keep close in this unpredictable world she'd stepped into. But then Lisa continued, her little voice still calm and matter-of-fact. "It's because when she was married to my daddy, he didn't take her anywhere. But he takes you everywhere. You're always with my daddy. My mommy never got to be with my daddy." It was as though the air thickened in an instant. That simple truth, spoken so plainly, cut through the glamour, the gifts, the moments of make-believe, and laid bare a much more painful reality. Linda had been living what felt like a dream, unaware of the echoes that dream left behind for someone else. In that moment, Linda didn't feel like the chosen one. She felt the full weight of the contrast between her present and Priscilla's past. Elvis, for all his affection and generosity, had shifted in how he showed love, and that shift had not gone unnoticed, even by his daughter. Lisa Marie's confession revealed what no magazine ever captured, what no stage performance ever showed, that love in Elvis's world didn't come in equal parts. There was an emotional imbalance, a lingering hurt that never quite healed. And now, standing there with a child's words hanging heavy in the room, Linda saw just how deep those emotional currents ran beneath the surface of their lives. As time went on, the true depth of Elvis's request began to unravel in Linda's mind like a thread quietly pulled from the edge of a tapestry. What seemed like a small favor at first, a simple request about jewelry, had layers she hadn't fully grasped in the moment. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and a deeper understanding of the emotional terrain Elvis was constantly navigating, she began to see it for what it truly was. Not a superficial concern, but a gesture laden with meaning. It wasn't about diamonds, it was about damage, about history, about a man trying to tiptoe through the emotional wreckage he left behind while still trying to build something new. To Linda, it became painfully clear this wasn't just Elvis being thoughtful. This was Elvis making amends in the only way he knew how. He wasn't trying to erase the past, but he was trying to soften its edges. He carried a kind of emotional debt, one he never spoke about loud but tried to pay off in quiet moments, in whispered pleas, in the careful management of feelings that still lingered between him and the woman he once called his wife. Every decision, every hesitation was a sign that he hadn't fully moved on. Not because he hadn't found love again, but because part of him remained tethered to the life he had before. And though Linda honored his request with grace, it was Priscilla who may have felt its weight the most. Somewhere along the way, she sensed what Elvis was doing, not just loving someone new, but doing so while trying to protect the emotional remnants of their old life together. For Priscilla, that realization wasn't just sobering, it was revealing. It showed that even as Elvis opened his heart to someone else, he couldn't entirely close the chapter they had written together. The pain they once shared hadn't vanished. It had simply evolved into silence, into gestures, into secrets. And in that silence, Priscilla may have realized that the king, for all his charm and charisma, was still haunted by what he couldn't undo. In the quiet moments, the ones without flashing cameras or screaming fans, Linda began to see her place in Elvis's world with heartbreaking clarity. She wasn't just his new love, his confidant, or the woman by his side. She was something more complicated. She was the one who had walked in after the storm, but still stood amid the debris of a love that hadn't fully faded. Every look, every choice, every gentle hesitation reminded her that she wasn't simply building a future with Elvis. She was inheriting a past that refused to stay tucked away. And with that inheritance came a silent responsibility to love him fully while understanding that part of his heart was already spoken for. Elvis, for all his larger-than-life charm, was a man in emotional retreat. He wanted peace, harmony, and happiness for everyone he cared about. But in trying to shield everyone from hurt, Priscilla, Lisa Marie, Linda, he was slowly unraveling beneath the weight of his own emotional balancing act. He carried guilt like a second skin, empathy like armor. The public saw the king, polished, adored, magnetic. But Linda saw the man who second-guessed his choices, who lay awake at night wondering if he had done the right thing, who held tightly to the people he loved even when he knew he couldn't be everything they needed him to be. And that, in the end, was the most heartbreaking part of loving him. It wasn't just about enduring fame or navigating gossip. It was about accepting that love, in Elvis's world, was never simple. It came wrapped in complexity, stitched with old wounds and quiet sacrifices. Linda found herself caught between what was and what could be, loving a man who still whispered to the past while trying to sing his way into the future. And as much as she gave him strength, she knew some parts of him would always be divided, torn between two timelines, two truths, and the silent promise to never let either completely go. Elvis Presley will always be remembered as a legend, an icon who captivated the world with his voice, his style, and his undeniable presence. But behind the velvet curtain and the gold records was a man wrestling with emotions far more fragile than fame could ever protect. He wasn't just larger than life, he was deeply human, full of contradictions and quiet heartbreaks that rarely made the headlines. It's in these intimate, unguarded moments that we truly begin to understand the emotional depth of the man behind the music. Because sometimes even a king struggles with love, regret, and the weight of promises he couldn't always keep. And now we turn the spotlight to you. What do you think Priscilla truly felt in those moments? Seeing the man she once loved still carrying pieces of their past into someone else's present. Would you honor such a request? A request meant to shield another from pain, even if it meant dimming your own light? These aren't just questions about Elvis. They're questions about love, grace, and the complicated ties that bind people together long after goodbyes are said. No matter whose side you find yourself on, the emotions in this story are as real as they come. If this glimpse into Elvis's private world moved you, we invite you to be part of the conversation. Like this video if you believe there's always more beneath the surface. Subscribe to the channel for more hidden chapters from the life of the king. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like these aren't just about the past. They're about how we understand love, loss, and legacy today.